Way back in the early 2020, I was doing pretty badly financially. I was behind on my rent, my hours at my job had just been cut, and almost all my money was being funneled into vet bills for my cat, who thankfully fully recovered from the surgery. But then, boom, the pandemic hit, and it was devastating. You see, I live out here in California, where the restrictions have been particularly harsh, and they were most definitely at the harshest during the summer of 2020. When I lost my job, I would claim unemployment, but when it came to my apartment, I decided it would just be better to find an alternative form of accommodation for a while. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I started living in my car. It sucked, just as hard as you can imagine. And as a result, I only lasted about 10 days before I just threw into the town, moved back in with my parents up near Eugene. But in those 10 days, I had some seriously freaky stuff happen to me. Probably the most unexpected and therefore the creepiest was somewhere I least expected it. So just for clarity's sake, I am a girl in my early 20s, not particularly tall, not particularly strong, and after searching for a relatively safe place to park up every night, I ended up finding a quiet little cul-de-sac that seemed as safe as far as any I knew to park up and get some sleep. Best thing about it was almost office spaces, so I could just take up empty spaces at night and then leave before anyone showed up to complain. The only active place was all-night McDonald's, and I always figured it was a good place to park near, since there was food, coffee, and a bathroom to wash up. And so before one night, before I am about to sleep, I feed my cat and check my surroundings to make sure it's pretty much all clear. The only person around was a guy sitting at the outdoor seating at McDonald's. But he's not looking at me, not doing anything remotely creepy, so I figured it was safe to go to sleep. I don't even know how much time passed before I wake up to the sound of Oscar yelling. I figured it might be another cat outside, so I tell him to be quiet. But he won't, and he kept yelling, then hissing at something. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong. I parked in the same place every night, slept in almost the same position every night, and the position I slept in meant there was always this annoying beam of light coming in through my window from the McDonald's across the street. So when I opened my eyes, I was immediately half blinded by the floodlight. I knew something was up close against my car, and then when I looked, I swear, a legitimate chill went up my spine. Some guy, and I don't know if he was the same one who was eating, was pressed right up against the glass, hands around his eyes like goggles so he can see into the dark car, and he's just staring directly at me. He didn't look particularly scary. I think he just had a dark color windbreaker on, and I know he had short, neatly cropped hair. It looked so normal, but it wasn't so much about how he looked, but it was about the way he was looking at me. Eyes all wide, a slight curl to his lips, almost like he's thinking of all the possibilities that come from having found a vulnerable sleeping girl. The fact that Oscar was ready to claw his face off didn't seem to faze him. He was just fixated on one thing, and one thing alone. Me. I swear to God, no one ever made me feel like that, ever. Not before that night, not after either. It's like he didn't see me as a person, or like he found a $20 bill on the floor, something he could just take. Luckily, I kept all my doors locked, so there was no danger of him getting into the car unless he broke a window. But he didn't make it any less frightening when he was leaning up, looking around, and suddenly tried to open one of my car doors. I grabbed my phone setup and started screaming for him to get away from my car, saying that I was going to call the cops and I'm calling 911 right now. At that, he just started walking away from the car like nothing had happened. I saw two people stop and say something to him on the way into the McDonald's, but he just shrugged it off, walked into the darkness, and disappeared. By the time the cops showed up, he was long gone. And it wasn't like he had committed any real crime to file a report. But still, the cop was really understanding and told me I'd done the right thing, but also advised me to scout out some other potential sleeping situation. And they were definitely not the most helpful cops I've ever dealt with, but the guy who took my report was really understanding, unlike his cold partner who I swear was only moments away from rolling his eyes at me. That was the worst thing about living in my car. People treat you like a human being until the very second you let it slip out. And then it's like a race to find out what's wrong with you. Drugs, mental breakdown, scandalous divorce. Oh, and always has to be something negative. Too like I just can't be down on my luck because of a freaking global pandemic. Not everyone was like that, but were enough to make it a problem. So please, homeless people need a lot of things. Compassion, financial, and moral support, but they definitely don't need your judgment.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. So this story is so cliche and ridiculous that no one ever believes it's real. Except for the people that were there. It was Halloween 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day off after Halloween because it's considered a church holiday. So my friends would game to start our weekend early. One night, where we didn't go to the parties, we usually did the same thing together. We'd sit on my front step for a couple of hours and joke around. Then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this crappy pizza place across town because the prices were so low. Since a friend of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we went in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It was around 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint was closing up. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finished our food, refilled our drinks, and headed out to get back to my house. On the way, we had to cross this large mall parking lot. It's about 4 football fields long and 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we weren't dumb, naive kids. We'd all grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise and were competent out on the street by ourselves, but we had experienced something that night that we were totally not prepared for. So we were walking through this parking lot, and it was absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight, when suddenly we saw a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know the old white van cliche, but I swear this is a real story. I pointed it out to my friends, and we picked up our pace. We put the collars on our jackets and hunched our shoulders to make us seem a bit bigger than we were. And in an instant, the van sped up and cut off our path. Everything in the van was pitch black, so we couldn't see any people. And that was when someone yelled out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween! You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't cut you off in a parking lot unless it has bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We couldn't run, but they're in a van. They would catch up to us easily, and we'd have to turn our backs to them. He said again, "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I responded, trying to sound tough. "Yes, it's over now, so we're heading home and you're in our way." "Now dude, Halloween is over. We still got tons of candy in there." The tone suddenly shifted, and we still couldn't see anyone in the van. The 3 of us puffed out a chest and got ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by surely saying, "Listen, dickhead, I don't know what you're thinking about to do, but if you don't leave, you're gonna get your ass kicked." Once he'd said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had black suits with black leather gloves and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't a Halloween prank. At that moment, all 3 of us went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation, and I had no idea what these guys were planning to do with 3 18-year-old men. But they seemed like they knew what they were doing. We were all getting ready for the fight of our lives, but then the van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. That was it. I mentioned that there was 3 of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend Pat, the one that had stayed silent until this point, leaned into both of us and quietly said this, a Hail Mary. But get ready to run when I say go, all right? He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it at all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat then screamed run and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction and we hurried our asses home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happening. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped a big-ass rock into his cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or at least brought us enough time to put up distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that. I'm still amazed by it. But the moral of the story, kids, don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight. It was an early Easter morning at David's household. People were getting ready to have a gathering at their homes, and kids were especially excited for the Easter festivities to begin. Aunt Genuine had set up a table for all the kids. The eggs were all assembled there, and the paints were all set. She was ready to sit with the children and paint the eggs however they liked. She was looking forward to all the different ideas the kids in the house would share with her. Paul and Cliff were already out and arranging the whole barbecue and a little PlayStation for the kids that were going to arrive. Georgina was busy preparing all the food and arranging the snacks and drinks. Malcolm, who also was the youngest of the 3 brothers, didn't arrive yet. He was a detective. The David family in the suburban of New York was an upbeat big joint family of 3 brothers and their family, and the house was always filled with the noises of children. The suburban American lifestyle that everybody wanted, their end goal to be, was achieved by the Davids. Malcolm was the youngest. He was the detective at the local police department, and the other was Paul David. He was a stockbroker at the New York Stock Exchange. And then there was Cliff David, the investment banker. So as far as the career choices of Davids go, Paul and Cliff were bringing in a whole lot of money, and that was the initial reason they got to move out to the suburbia. Aunt Genuine was their only sister, and probably was the kindest of all. She was a teacher at a local school, and was highly regarded in the community due to her behavior. David was highly regarded in the area, and even helped out everyone when they got the chance. It was rare for someone in their position to be this kind, and people around them were happy. Paul and Cliff both had their children, and were both divorced. They got custody of the children, and some even say that it was Cliff who run some contacts to win the custody. But nothing bad was said about them because of their kindness and constant help they gave the community. They were holding the annual Easter egg hunting in their backyard and were very excited about it. A lot of children from the local community were there, and they were all excited to see all the fun activities that David had for them. All the kids that entered were provided a bib to keep things running smoothly. A big lunch for everyone in town was arranged, and everyone mingled and talked about anything and everything. A whole lot of kids were found egg hunting and were enjoying the event. The whole Easter went up smoothly, and then later on, when all the kids were called into the front gate, a number of them lined up with all the eggs they had found. Every single kid was there. But there was no sign of Paul's son and Cliff's son. They went to look for them, as they thought they might have been doing the egg hunting still. They looked everywhere. There was no sign of both the boys in the radius of the event. They decided to call the police, and the event was brought to a halt. Every guest was thoroughly questioned, and no one knew anything about the boys. The police were scared about losing light, and they know that once it got dark, it would become difficult to find the children. Then, one of the kids that were egg hunting with the boys told what happened, and he told the police that a big rabbit took both the boys with them. Malcolm decided to take the lead on the case and officially declared it the case of kidnapping. He knew that every moment is precious, so he put on a call for search and issued a judge-signed an order to search the area under the radius of 10 kilometers and even to cease and arrest anyone dressed in a rabbit suit. And there were a lot of people who were dressed as a rabbit, and the closest was the local boy who was dressing up as the rabbit in their party. Malcolm started to interrogate him, and the boy explained that how could have he kidnapped the boys if he was right here at the party? By logic, Malcolm agreed. The boy then acknowledged Malcolm and the tense situation he was in. Paul and Cliff were both keeping this under the house for now, and they didn't want in any way to get the press involved, so they kept checking in with Malcolm on the process. Search team had no update, and the forest area was being searched down by everyone in town. Paul didn't want his wife to get involved, so he never told her about the kidnapping. Cliff, on the other hand, decided to call in the wife. She was scared and angry and pleaded for Malcolm to find them soon. Malcolm was losing light, so he called in reinforcements and decided to do an air search over the forest. The search was now unsuccessful. It started raining. The helicopter was called off, and the forest was now getting denser and darker to search in. The search was not being held off. Everyone out of their town they're willing to look for the kids regardless of the weather. And now, as the time was moving forward, the search was put on hold. Everyone returned from their search in the forest. Everyone stood by their side all the time, and there was not a single person in the community that wasn't willing to do everything possible. The night passed, and everyone was still wide awake and everything they could. Malcolm decided to do a run-through for every dress vendor in the block to see all the other rabbit costume rentals. One by one, they started interrogating everyone who had the rabbit dress on, but there was no luck. Everyone's alibi checked out. There was no clue to as who was the giant rabbit who took the kids. They decided to another full sweep of the house, and surprisingly in the basement, found another rabbit costume. They decided to send it to the forensics to get the prints, and prints they found didn't match anyone in the system, and so the next suspects were the people in the house the other day. There were only 3 people who had the access to the basement: Paul, Genuine, Malcolm. And weirdly, none of them seemed to be the suspect. But Malcolm still decided to get everyone's prints. 3 days had gone by. There was no clue to as where the kids were. They waited for the results on the prints on the costume found in the basement. It wasn't a match, meaning there was a 4th person inside their basement. They were clueless about the intruder because of the event. In a surprising turn of events, one of the dry cleaners who rented the rabbit costume noticed an irregularity in his ledger. He said that the guy who was the Easter rabbit at David's party had rented out 2 different costumes. Malcolm showed the photogenic evidence of the costume found in the basement and showed it to the shopkeeper. He confirmed that it was the same costume. Malcolm was pissed that he let the man slip right under his fingers. They put an APB on the man and issued a nationwide arrest for the man. 3 days later, the guy was found in an alleyway in a completely different state. He was planning on escaping the country. He was questioned after he was brought in. He agreed to have kidnapped the children, but he said that all he did was hand out the children to a woman. The description of the woman matched that of Paul's wife. Their doubt became clear, and maybe the reason why she never called him back when Paul tried to inform him about the lost children. Malcolm took a SWAT team and decided to raid her house. But to his surprise, the house was empty. The case twisted itself even more. They brought in surveillance tape from every bus station, every railway station, and the airport to see if they ever left the state. But there was no luck. Paul suggested Malcolm look for them at the family cabin in the forest up north. They decided to move, and it turned out to be an inn lead. There was no one. But the ash in the fireplace seemed recent, and Malcolm ordered an aerial thermal search of the area to get all sort of heat signature. 2 hours after the big search, the helicopter picked up 3 heat signals, and it was from inside of the river. Their biggest fear was now coming alive. The rescue team and the paramedics were called. After an hour, body of one female that matched the descriptions of Paul's wife was found tied to that of 2 boys who matched the description of both Paul's son and Cliff's son. And from her legs were tied to a lot of bricks. They were drained out of blood from previously inflicted wounds, and later on in reports, turned out the kids were dead before they were drowned, but the woman, on the other hand, died because of drowning. Upon searching, a suicide note was recollected blaming Paul for the suicide. Paul could not bear this pain, and he was found hanging in his room a day later. Cliff was destroyed, and the Davids was not the same happy family they once were. Malcolm took on drinking and failed throughout his career and was later on suspended. The terrible suicide distraught the family, or that was what it seemed to them, until the same case was called in on Easter next year. It was the Fowlers this time. What seemed like suicide was now a case of a serial killer. The case of Dav opened up again, and Malcolm was put in on the case. This is how the story of the Easter Bunny killer started.
So back in 2015, I was a freshman in high school. On one weekend, I went to go down to my friend Andrew's house to meet up with other friends to go into DC. We had a great time in DC, but now it was getting dark outside, so we all started getting back on one of the trains. At first, it was all nothing, not becoming unnerving at first until we stopped at the Bethesda station, and 4 guys came in. We're singing obnoxiously loud in the train and trying to intimidate people on the train. One of my friends, Gabby, was starting to get a bit scared. The loud singing woke up my friend Andrew. He immediately knew something was up, as all of my other friends knew as well. The final stop where we got off was the stop. The 4 guys got off as well, but they were ahead of us, so we thought that it was over. After that, we started heading toward the parking lot, but my friend's mom wasn't there to pick us up, so we all stood there to wait. We were all talking in a circle, then the 4 loud guys from earlier still walking towards us, but with more people this time. This now big group of people were walking around us and circling us, trying to intimidate us. We didn't know what was going to happen, so we all stood there just to wait for them to make the first move. This group started then trying another intimidation tactic, which was starting to low-key scare my friends Gabby and Kimmy, but we all didn't make the first move. They broke into our social circle, and we were getting close to all of us. Nevin was stepping on some of our shoes, and one of them said, See, I like reading books. My friend Andrew was slowly pulling out, trying to hide the fact that he was pulling out a knife, and so was I. But one of them saw it. So we were expecting to have a fight start to happen. But thankfully, they all realized this possible robbery attempt might not be easy because some of us weren't going to go without a fight. Thankfully, they all started heading away. But it was still a very unnerving experience. About a week later, a local news station posted on Twitter that a man was beaten to death and robbed at the same metro station. I still wonder to this day if that was the same group of people we had encountered a couple of weeks prior.